Hello, Nick. Welcome to Awaken and Align.
Hello, Laura.
So you told our astrology class such a beautiful story of how you came to be an astrologer, and you gave an example with the eclipse transit that you were teaching us about. Do you mind first telling us a little bit about yourself and how you came to astrology?
Yeah, totally. Thank you. First off, thank you for having me on. And so, for those of y'all that I don't know, my name is Nick Lasky. I'm a professional astrologer and psychic based in Richmond, Virginia. And my journey with astrology, you're correct, began very strongly around a solar eclipse. And basically, I was a student at a university in Charlottesville, Virginia, and was in a major life crossroads trying to sort out all these existential dilemmas. Who am I? What am I here for? What is this university situation I was in? And eventually stumbled into a metaphysical shop called the Aquarian Bookshop. And it so happened that evening there was a channeling program with an enlightened teacher, and it was literally on the night of an eclipse. Anyways, I went to the program that night, and as a result of that, met a spiritual teacher that I still to this day study with, and all these incredibly important people in my life. And the shop, the Aquarian, a few weeks later, I started working there, and suddenly was immersed, in the world of metaphysics and psychics and astrologers and pendulums and magic and all this stuff. And the fascination overtook me. And I can actually remember just before that, I had looked up online. Someone had told me, a fellow Scorpio had told me to check out my astrology chart online. And I did. And it completely blew my mind how accurate it was. But then I kind of moved on. And then as I got back into that world, it was the calling overtook me.
Yeah. Speaking of Aquarian, I gave you a couple dates and you picked this one, and I was like, this is such a random day. And then I looked and it was Aquarius, the sun moved into Aquarius, and we're officially in the Aquarius season. So happy Aquarius season, everybody. I know we have beautiful Sylvia here who's an Aquarius. So hello. So I don't know where you want to take this. Like, where do you even want to start? There's so much to talk about. We could even start with this week. What is happening here?
Yeah, we definitely need to start with this week because it is quite a week, folks.
Oh my word. Oh my word. So before I, tune into your astrology class, I look at my chart every single day, but I looked at tomorrow's chart and I was like, oh my word, what is happening?
Yeah, so, and can I screen share? Can I actually put
Yes,
on
I
this?
think I actually have to make you host first. So let's do that. There you go.
Gotcha. That if I can do that, that would be fantastic.
Yes.
I want to actually, for those of y'all that are, relatively new to astrology, you may have never seen a chart before, but I want to actually put up the chart of right now and then the chart of tomorrow. And so I practice Western astrology, which is very different than the Mayan cosmovision, the Mayan astrology that many of our friends in the Cacao circles are focused on. And it's also different than Indian astrology, but it's probably the most popular one here in the Western world. But so I just want to, just for a moment, direct everybody's attention to a couple things, and I'm going to take it back down. So what you were talking about was Mars and Uranus in your sixth house.
Mhm.
Get a nice color here. Let's get a nice bright red because that's the feel. So we have these two friends, Mars and Uranus, right now in a coming together, very, very close. Tomorrow, they're actually going to be exact in their what's called a conjunction. There's two planets aligning in the same spot. So that is very intense, and I'm going to dive into that. But then I also want to draw our attention to this bunch of friends down here in Aquarius. Okay, and especially the Sun, Saturn, and Jupiter. These are the symbols that represent those planets. For those of you, by the way, if anybody is looking at this chart, like what in the world am I looking at other than just a cool kind of like circles and little symbols and colors? This is a flat solar system. So imagine that the solar system is now turned vertical. And this is a 360-degree snapshot of the sky, literally right now in Richmond, Virginia, where probably I'm the only person that is in Richmond, but regardless. So what we see happening is an aspect of tension is building, and it has really been building, interestingly enough, very strongly since January 6th. Okay, and some of y'all remember that as a very important day.
Mhm.
So what we see going on here is something called a square. You see, this is a 90-degree aspect. I drew here a nice right angle. But the planets, so the Sun, Saturn, and Jupiter in Aquarius are making a 90-degree square with Mars and Uranus in Taurus. All right, so I'm going to stop all that because for those of you all that are totally new, that is probably wonderful picture, but doesn't mean as much. So let's break it down into English. So basically, Uranus, which is the planet of revolution, of rebellion, of wanting to break free from the old paradigm, is in a tight square, as I said before. And you can just think of a square as a difficult relationship, one maybe of tension, conflict, with the planets Jupiter and Saturn. For those of y'all, did anybody who here saw the Great Conjunction? You peeked out in the night sky a few weeks ago. Okay, so that was Jupiter and Saturn. So they're still very close to each other, but they're in this tough kind of relationship with this very rebellious planet. And so this week, and specifically tomorrow, and of course, it just couldn't be any other way that the energy, part of the energy is culminating tomorrow.
Mhm.
Is all about the rebellious revolutionary urge in conflict to Saturn and Jupiter. Saturn being the power, the powers that be, the rules, the system, the structures, the organizations, traditions, you know. So one of the things that we are for sure seeing, you know, we'll continue to see this week is doing things very much differently than they've been done. I don't know exactly what's going to happen in the inauguration, but I imagine there's going to be some new precedents unfolding. You know, definitely the previous president not attending. I think that hasn't been done since the 1800s. There's all these like rebelling the tradition or rebelling from a sense of limitation. And so that's, you know, that's these high up political figures here in the United States. Of course, we're only talking about the United States now, but this is also globally. And then there's various groups of people that are also feeling this electric urge to fight or to rebel. And it can be on any side. You know, and Jupiter being in the mix, Jupiter is one of the planets that is associated with justice, with a sense of higher ideal. Jupiter rules the courts, Jupiter rules the laws. Jupiter would literally rule like senators or the legislature, and also a religion. And so there's also this building of wanting to fight for justice, where maybe there's been a sense that there hasn't been justice, and that is all across the board, fighting for liberty and for freedom. And so what I suspect is, definitely tomorrow and for a few more days, there will be some intense revolutionary energy or more rebelling. And Mars coming into the mix is like adding a firecracker into the mix. It's adding so much heat and a little bit of hostility and aggression. And it just is crazy how it's going to be exact tomorrow with the Mars Uranus coming together. So, this week is one to be very, very wise. And one thing that I would recommend that everybody do is either meditate or use your, gatherings with friends or your family or even just by yourself to emanate a sense of calmness and clarity and peace. Because one of the things that these energies are really creating is instability. There's a sense of being ungrounded. There's a sense of like things could change. There's a little bit of chaos. Who knows what's going to happen? There's uncertainty. Mars is coming along to like add more stress and anxiety to that or tension. And, I've been feeling it. You said you've been feeling this electrical kind of pulse of these past few days. And so one of the things that when I go into astrology, I love to talk about it, philosophically and, like what we're talking about, but also how to apply it practically. And, really, really ground that into our daily life. So one of the things that I highly recommend for everybody listening is to find some way to release this intense energy. It's building up, you're probably feeling it. And one of mine, and definitely your favorite ways, Laura, I know because I've seen your Instagram, is dance.
Yes.
So whether it's dance or martial arts or sports or exercise or whatever, really diving into some creative expression, finding some way to release any kind of pent up or electrical or anxious energy is important. And to just close kind of this overall week, this is also, especially with Saturn and Uranus, those two planets being in relationship to each other, this is the beginning of this happening 3 times. So it's going to happen 2 more times throughout the year. So this is like the first go round. So anyways, another thing is this is like setting the stage for the rest of the year. However, this one is a little bit more intense because Mars and Jupiter are also in the mix.
Yeah, and I also think it's interesting that all the planets are not retrograde right now, and they were for so long. And I think all that, and collectively, we've all been pent up at home, going inward. And now it's like, boof, like all this energy coming out, all of this like anger and confusion and frustration. And I see it playing out in that way as well.
Well, that's very interesting that you brought that up, because one of the things that was very, very interesting at the beginning of the current president's administration, there were no retrograde planets for like a month. And it just seemed like it was a blitz of this happening, this change, this happening. And it was just like everything was moving forward. Nothing was stopping that momentum until I believe it was in February at some point when Jupiter went retrograde, and the courts, literally, which Jupiter rules the courts, as I said, started putting halting his travel bans that were happening early on. And so, yeah, for a few more days, nothing is retrograde. And that's an indication that everything, intention, manifestation, what you want to do, there's not as much preventing it other than what's internal. within yourself. So it's like full speed ahead until we get to Mercury retrograde on the 30th.
Hmm. So for 2 weeks until January 30th, or like 10 days, full speed ahead, manifestations, do all the things. And then what is your perspective on Mercury retrograde? Is it as like disruptive as everyone makes it to be?
Laura, I am so glad you asked. Because, and this is actually one of the reasons why I wanted to do the podcast now, is because it's just before Mercury retrograde. So Mercury retrograde has a reputation for being just about the worst thing that can ever possibly happen. And of course, it happens 3 times a year. So, we're kind of stuck with it. Unless you go to another planet, then I imagine you could get away with it, depending on where that planet is. But no, Mercury retrograde is not so bad as the mainstream pop culture has kind of taken and run with it. It is a time majorly of introspection, of slowing down. It's kind of the universe or the solar system's push for us to slow down and to reflect and to turn within. When a planet goes retrograde, the function of that planet becomes primarily expressed inward rather than externally. And so Mercury is the mind. Mercury is our communication and our expression. And so it's an indication of a time to really reflect and turn within, contemplate, the momentum that you're on. Do I want to continue in this momentum? Do I want to continue with this relationship? Is my thinking about this, or my goals something that I still feel aligned with? And do I want to adjust anything? And the other thing that I want to say specifically about this Mercury retrograde is that it's happening in Aquarius, which is an air sign. And the 2 other Mercury retrogrades this year will also be in air signs. So this is a year full of air.
Yeah.
And so this Mercury retrograde will be from January 30th until February 20th. Then we have one coming up at the end of May to May 29th to June 22nd in Gemini. And then there's one September 26th to October 18, and that's in Libra. And here is what I really recommend for folks during these periods is, as much as you can, to journal or to reflect, or if you like to draw or use a little voice recorder. Sometimes when I like to reflect and talk to myself, I like to use different voices, so it sounds like I'm having a conversation. And that's just my own little take. But yeah, it's a time to really slow down, turn within, more meditation, perhaps turning the phone off for a little bit longer of a period, perhaps, or technology, take a day, take a weekend to unplug. I could keep going, but I'll leave it there with, unless you have any other questions about the retrograde.
So, we hear through pop culture, like things not to do during Mercury retrograde, like not to buy any new electronics, and make sure that all of your technology is put on silent when you want it to be silent, and all that kind of thing. Is it okay to start something new? Like if you have a project, let's say I want to launch something, and I mean, you have to still live your life. Is that still okay?
Absolutely not. You have to put your life on pause, okay? And we must all go to the Shire and live in the earth. No. Yeah, listen, regardless of whatever's happening from an astrological standpoint, there's always like an optimal, way of flowing with it. Like, yeah, it's not recommended to sign a contract during Mercury retrograde, or buy a car, or buy major electronics, or make a major announcement. But if you have to, you have to, and there are certain ways from an astrological perspective of mitigating that. of making the blow a little bit less. And that's choosing specific timings that are more auspicious or less inauspicious during the retrograde. But typically what I say is, if you have to sign a contract, if you have to get major, car work done, or you need to buy a computer, or, for some reason you must get married during Mercury retrograde. But specifically with the previous things, make sure everything is triple checked. Before you pick your car from the shop, make sure it's triple checked. Before you sign contracts, get somebody else to look over it. Before you send a mass email out, triple check it to make sure it says what you want it to say and it's going to whom you want it to go to.
Got it. So I get this question a lot, and I just wanted to hear your perspective on it. I've heard a lot of people ask me, is 2021 going to be like 2022? And my answer to that is no. I feel like every year is going to have its own challenges and its own obstacles, because I just feel like 2022 is just so tremendously life-changing for so many people.
You mean 2020?
2020, yes. But is 2021 like, oh, we get like a little breather here? Like, is there any reprieve from 2020?
Is there light?
Is there light?
Yes. So, yes. From purely an astrological standpoint, we are not completely in the clear, so to speak, where everything's suddenly just going to like, ooh, we'll get all cush and everything is back to normal or whatever. It's not like that. But it's not going to be as intense as 2020. Just from an overall perspective, there definitely will continue to be major. I mean, Uranus is one of the major themes and players this year, which is, this archetype of revolution and breaking free from the old, from the old paradigm and the old habits, and the old way of doing things. And yeah, for society, for the collective, it's still, still going to be intense. It's not like suddenly everything just gets all nice and easy for everybody, but it is definitely, it's a step down. Where I think we've, to a certain extent, peaked in our intensity, and we're headed for an easier road. Yes, but not purely easy.
Okay. That makes me feel a lot better, to be honest with you. So you mentioned that the Saturn Uranus squares are happening 3 times this year, and Mercury retrograde 3 times this year. Is there any other transits throughout 2021 we should be aware of?
Yes. So actually, I want to give just one more acknowledgement to the Saturn Uranus square. So the 3 times that they're coming into conjunction, and the conjunction means, they're conjoining, they're in the same place in the zodiac. On February 17th, June 14th, and December 24th. Okay. And so in addition to how we'll see this play out in the collective, which also, by the way, one of the other aspects, on a much more positive note, this is like incredible scientific breakthroughs and medicine breakthroughs and technology breakthroughs, especially with Saturn in Aquarius, the sign of technology, and Uranus bringing this catalyst for amazing inventions and new ideas. We're going to see a profound proliferations of science, technology, and things in this way. Like even Zoom, how we're communicating right now. I imagine by the end of this year, there'll be like several steps up in regards to these big, telecommunications and, you know, of course, also we're seeing the big rollout of 5G probably this year, which we're not all too excited about. But you know, there are many positive things that are happening as a result of that with technology availability, what we can do. And, you know, it's crazy. Like when you think about it, the internet has literally only been around for 30 years.
I'm older than the internet.
You are the internet superior officer. So the internet will bow to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyways, that's some things. And I also think in that same light, societies, countries, you know, villages, groups of people were part of Aquarius is also the tribe. It's the organizations. And so one of the other things we're going to see is like how people come together is also going to change.
Yes.
You know, like right now where there's no Broadway, we're not having music concerts in person. I mean, not in the scale that it was, and big sporting events and whatnot with big, you know, fans. So part of that Uranus aspecting Saturn and Aquarius is the structure of how people come together in large scale ways is also dramatically shifting this year.
Yeah. I think also on an individual level, it's asking us to look within our own structures and our own, how we've lived our lives, to think of it in a different way and to do it in a different way for the long term. Because again, like Saturn is for the long term.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And thank you for bringing in the personal perspective, because for those of y'all, one thing I wanted to share is for those of y'all that happen to know your chart a little bit, and you can find out the houses of your chart. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, there's 12 houses in an astrology chart. If you can find out the houses where you have Aquarius and Taurus, these are the signs that we're talking about that are in play here.
Yeah.
These are the areas of life. The houses represent areas of life. For instance, the 6th house represents work. The 10th house represents, you know, career, which is a little bit different. The 2nd house, money. The 7th house, love, relationships. So anyways, if you can find out where you have Aquarius and Taurus, this will give you insight into where these major, you know, personal revolutions are going to be taking place, and big changes from the way that you've always done things, and perhaps profound, you know, opportunities, but also, you know, struggles in perhaps, you know, the ego wanting to be attached to, oh, I'm used to that, or that's comfortable. Yeah. So like you said, I really think right now one of the key words is adaptability. You know, because change is totally on the menu, whether you like it or not. Okay, it's one of those, you know, like when you go to a restaurant and they just right away they bring the chips or the bread or what you didn't, or they bring you water. Didn't want the water. Sorry, I don't drink tap water. Nope. Well, we got to put it here for you, anyways, sir.
Yeah.
Change is on the menu. Change is what's happening. So how adaptable can we be? That's the question.
Yeah, and Aquarius and Taurus are fixed signs, so I feel like there is a lot of tension there. One thing I did want to ask is Saturn's, you know, Saturn in the classical tradition rules Aquarius, and Uranus is the modern ruler of Aquarius. Does this have any impact on that at all?
So here's my take on that. So modern astrologers will tell you that Uranus rules Aquarius. More traditional astrologers, which are practicing the astrology over the past several thousand years, or the way it was practiced as far as which planets rule which signs, would say no, that Saturn rules Aquarius. I've dabbled, I've used both, and in my experience, Saturn works better with ruling Aquarius. That being said, the archetypes, which are just universal patterns of energy that flow through everyone and everything, of Uranus and Aquarius are very similar. So it's kind of like, it's like resonance, you know, like when you play singing bowls that resonate to each other, they're not the same, but they resonate and it creates this either harmony or dissonance. There's a harmony happening with Uranus and Aquarius, and the electric, you know, non-traditional, unique, trailblazing, rebellious kind of energy is coming forth very strongly this year with that.
Got it. We have a question here. With Saturn and Uranus in square, how many degrees of aspect to the natal chart would you consider for square or trine?
Well, that's a fabulous question. So the orbs that I like to use, I mean, many traditional astrologers will actually just say if it's in the same sign, so sign-based aspects. And I see that a little bit. I would say within 7 degrees, you'll definitely see it. Within 3 degrees, you'll see it very strongly.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I feel that on my moon and Venus there in Aquarius. It's like,
yeah,
right against it.
yeah. So if anybody, so as you were talking about fixed signs, so the 4 fixed signs are Aquarius, Taurus, Scorpio, and Leo. So if anybody has anything in the early to middle part of any of those signs, you know, Scorpio, Taurus, Leo, Aquarius, then you are being very strongly, directly activated by these 2 planets this year. And there's going to be major, major change unfolding in your life.
Yep. This question is, for someone who has mainly earth signs in their chart, what is the best time to launch a passion project?
Well, that is an interesting question.
What's a reading with Nick?
I mean, yeah, what I would say generally, a passion project, well, one thing that resonates with is the planet Mars, you know? So perhaps when your natal Mars is really well aspected, or when transiting Mars in the sky, is making a very harmonious aspect with your sun, because sun is the creative impulse. So I would say a good relationship with the sun and Mars would be good. Or if you get planets in, like a bunch of planets in earth signs, it's going to trine everything. It's going to make nice harmonious aspects with all those planets in earth. So, you know, Jupiter, something like that. Mars and earth signs.
Yeah. I assume that answer still applies to air signs and water signs and fire signs.
Totally. I mean, it's a very case by case basis. And here's what I really recommend, even probably to keep it more simple. I recommend to launch things while the moon is increasing. So the time between the new moon and the full moon, especially perhaps towards the beginning of that moon cycle. And, you know, don't do it during Mercury retrograde. But actually launching something literally the moment that Mercury goes direct is an incredibly powerful, magical time for that. But then there's other astrological alignments that I would look for. I mean, so one of the things that I do is help people with timing, with things like that, like when to start this business, when to, you know, don't have any meetings this day, or do your ritual this way, get married this day, you know. So it can be very specific or very general, depending on how much you want to.
Yeah.
How much Virgo you have in your chart.
Well, I just love, because we just talked about well, it was more me asking questions about my own chart, but what I love about your take on astrology is the embodiment part and the spiritual part of it. Like, I know what my homework I have to do from now until March, and I create like a good Saturn transit. I created the checklist, and I'm like, am I going to be ready for this transit? So I think that's the best way to move through these energies.
Yeah, totally. I mean, just being aware of them
Mm-hmm.
and contemplating them. And then here's the big thing that actually in one of the last class in the coming series is this, we're going into this, is being proactive with transits. So you see something coming up, perhaps it's difficult,
Yep.
and rather than waiting to see what happens, it's like, okay, I'm going to actually get a jump on this energy and start to channel it into my reality, um, consciously with my free will, rather than just, let's see what happens.
Exactly.
That is one of the blessings and one of the reasons I love astrology the most. In addition to helping put everything into perspective, it is also a great tool to maybe mitigate challenges, or to, it gives us a little bit of foresight.
Mm-hmm. Which I think you just answered a question here. When looking for Aquarius and Taurus and which house they correlate with, is that for the transit today or in the future?
That will depend on your personal chart. So it's going to be different for each person. So what I would recommend is to contact your local astrologer, and especially you'll need to know within a close range your exact birth time to know your houses.
Yeah.
Now, there's one other thing that I also want to mention too, just for this coming year.
Yes.
And that is, so Saturn has entered into Aquarius for about 3 years. But Jupiter is a little bit zippier, and Jupiter is actually going to zip right on through Aquarius and go into Pisces in May. And then we'll stay in Pisces until July 28th. And then actually is going to come back into Aquarius through retrograde motion. And then by the time we get to December 28th of this year, Jupiter goes back into Pisces. So one of the other big kind of turning point shifting periods that we'll see is when Jupiter changes signs into Pisces this year. So we're going to see a very...
about.
Go ahead.
I'm so excited about that.
Yes, because Jupiter rules Pisces.
Yes.
So Jupiter is very happy in Pisces. So, and that is from May 13th to July 28th. So, and here's just a general kind of blanket way of looking at things. Jupiter is the principle of expansion and growth, and a lot of other things. But when we talk about it as a collective, Jupiter is also where a big collective focus is. It's kind of like the collective, the mind is putting a lot of energy into themes related to this. I mean, I can remember back in, I don't remember all dates now, but it was, I think 2017, 2018, when Jupiter was in Scorpio, and we saw a big proliferation of the Me Too movement, of uncover all these scorpionic themes, right? Things that weren't normally discussed or shared, so that was one of the amazing things that came out of Jupiter and Scorpio. But also all this stuff about espionage and corruption, and these papers, and the what was it, like WikiLeaks and the other things like that. It was like all these secrets were coming out into the open. Then Jupiter moved into Sagittarius, and we saw a huge proliferation in a collective kind of focus, a lot more on actually immigration, on refugees, on international issues, and freedom. Sagittarius is also about freedom. And then most recently, this past year, Jupiter's been in Capricorn. And so, one of the big things that we've also seen, Capricorn is also very associated with the economy. And so like this, and the system and the structures. So Jupiter in Capricorn has been a big focus on this crazy economic situation that the world finds itself in, and governments, and what's unfolding there. So in Aquarius, we're going to see this big collective focus on new technology, on inventions, and on science, and on medicine. And we're already seeing it, with the vaccine, and other kinds of like ways that we can move humanity forward, or the tribe forward. The emphasis on the tribe. That's a sign of Aquarius. What's in the best for the tribe. But then when we get in for Jupiter in Pisces, like I said, May, June, July, Jupiter in Pisces is a proliferation and expansion into the non-physical and into the spiritual. And that is a very compassionate placement. Okay, so perhaps there's going to be some profound things that really tug on the heartstrings in a different kind of way that evokes a greater sense of compassion, on a greater universality, let's say, amongst all beings, countries, people. Pisces is the oneness of everything. And also we could see some other great focus on water in general. So that is one of the other big shifts that we'll see. And then it dips back into Aquarius for the second half of the year. And another thing we could talk about Aquarius is technology. Yeah. And literally the air and air waves and things unfolding in that way. So.
Mm-hmm. Cool. There is a question here about, so when Saturn and Uranus, I don't know how you pronounce that.
Uranus.
When they go square, this is why I love you as a teacher. You always like bring up the energy, in a square during Mercury retrograde. Are there any impacts or indications?
Indications. There are no contraindications for Uranus square Mercury retrograde. But yeah, so I imagine you are correct at some point later on in the retrograde that Uranus is going to be squaring Mercury. Okay, folks, especially then, all right, talk about all the classic Mercury retrograde mishaps. That is going to be like 2 an exponent of 5, okay? Unexpected weird technology things. My strong recommendation is before Mercury goes retrograde, back up your computer, back up any important files, whatever, your phone. Uranus square Mercury retrograde in Aquarius is funky technology stuff. I would not be surprised at all if on a global level, that could be like hacking, that could be like technology failure, system failure. It could be like power outages or weird stuff with technology. So brace yourself for some weird technology occurrences around that time. And I can actually see if I can pull up the dates for that. I don't have that prepared. So let me go back here. So let's take a look.
Well, you said that Saturn and Uranus is on February 17th, which is still during Mercury retrograde.
Yes. So let me see if we can, so it won't be exact, but right here at the end of February, Mercury will be at 11 Aquarius and Uranus will be at 7. So very, very close. Okay. And for this really, we could say the end of February. Yeah. Please back up your stuff. I mean, And we could see weird lightning storms too, weird electrical things happening on the planet.
Got it. So did you have any other transits you want to bring up? Because I did want to ask you, since it's so close, the full moon that's happening this month.
Well, totally. Oh my gosh. I prepared all kinds of other things that I haven't even looked at. No, I haven't. So for those of y'all that are like beginning in astrology, or you're like caught by the astrology bug, so to speak, you know that sometimes it can take you over and suddenly you find yourself like for hours looking into astrology stuff. Okay. So two other major things that is not global, but is very focused specifically here in the United States, is the fact that in these coming years, the United States is having its Pluto return. And so all the hype about the Great Conjunction that we've seen, that is the next big thing that we're going to see. For those of us that are either very strongly or mildly tapped into what's going on astrologically, you're going to see a proliferation of astrologers and people and information about the United States' Pluto return. Yeah. Basically, the US is about to turn 250 years old. Okay? It takes about 244, 250 or so years for Pluto to make its way through the whole zodiac. Just like your birthday every year, the sun comes back to the same place it was when you were born. That's called a solar return. Pluto, so Saturn, the classic Saturn return, that happens around 29 years. Pluto is the same thing in 250 years. So most humans don't have it, but countries do, folks. So anyways, I just want to give a little prelude to that because that's a whole lecture in and of itself. But expect to see major, in these coming years, the United States reorganizing itself in big kind of ways. And we're kind of seeing that, the beginnings of that. But the other big thing that I wanted to talk about specifically with this country and this year, it's happening this year in 2021, is the following, okay? Brace yourself, prepare to nerd out with me, friends. Okay. So what I want to do actually is pull up the chart of the United States of America. So yes, for those of you, go ahead, Laura.
No, I'm just excited because I'm such a nerd.
I know, me too. So for those of y'all that didn't know, countries also have birth charts. Okay. So what we are looking at right now, so first I'll just do this chart is one of the popular birth charts of the United States. There is a lot of discussion about what is the chart of the United States? When was the United States born? July 4th, 1776, at this specific time, 5:10 p.m., is one of the predominant ones, but there's not universal agreement about this. However, this is probably the most popular one. That being said, I just want to quickly draw everyone's attention to Neptune here. In the United States' chart, Neptune is at 22 degrees of Virgo. Okay. I'm now going to do something crazy and put two charts in one. Ta-da! Okay, so now if we take a look, the inner chart is still the USA. The outer chart is where everything is right now. You see the information is January 19th, 2021. Down here, Neptune is at 18 Pisces. And this year, we're going to see the exact opposition of Neptune to Neptune in the USA's birth chart, which happens about every 82 years. So this will, no, it happens every 164 years, okay? But it takes 82 years to get to the opposition, and then the next one will be in 164 years.
Mm-hmm.
So this will be the second time, actually, this has happened in the United States' history. And so I probably plan on giving some more information about this, but I got deep into a wormhole of research, okay, over the past few days, looking up important dates or historical events and things that were unfolding with Neptune, because 1776, Neptune was right here. 82 years later, Neptune was opposite, and then about in every 41 years or so, we'll see the square. Okay, so it'll complete the whole cycle in about 164 years. Anyways, Neptune rules fantasy, imagination, also spiritual things. Neptune is a classic thing associated with glamour and Hollywood and spirituality and psychic abilities and many things like that. But what it's hard to give it its due credit right now, but I just wanted to briefly acknowledge that a few things that I have seen in looking at these important Neptune moments in the United States' history, there are some very strong themes that I'll just give some highlights right now, but that I imagine are going to repeat, and we're already seeing repeating. So, specifically on the USA's first Neptune return, which is when it came back to the same place it was when the USA was born, it was 1938, 1990, 1939. That was, and these are, it's so uncanny how this happens. That was the birth of Superman and Batman. Okay, comic characters and fantasy like superheroes, that's so Neptunian, right? Superhero, Batman, Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. Specifically, it was also the birth of a new kind of technology called celluloid technology, which was used for animation films. Neptune, one of the other things we know associated with Neptune is drugs, addiction, alcohol, substance abuse, the addictive escapism. Very, very interesting. Alcoholics Anonymous was founded in 1935, and by 1939, its big book, which outlined, this 12-step program, was released, and it made this huge kind of moving forward, which is such a Neptunian thing. Later on, also on another Neptune contact, we saw the founding of Mothers Against Drunk Driving, which is a mother whose daughter was killed by a drunk driver. And so I find it interesting just on that strain that we are, as a country, in the middle of a huge opioid epidemic still. And we're starting to see there's some kind of accountability happening, I believe, with manufacturers and, medical professionals. But what we can expect is definitely some changes and some new beginnings, and perhaps some organizations or some healing that is happening in that regard. That's such a Neptunian thing. I could go on, but the other thing I want to say is in 1939, also, The Wizard of Oz premiered. The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck was published, and Gone with the Wind was released. So, and in 1940, the following year, the same time as Neptune return, we also saw the release of Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd and Tom and Jerry, right? So some of these huge American icons of our cartoons or fantasy realm, that's Neptune, were released on these major Neptune aspects.
Mhm.
And I could go, it gets even crazier as you get into the other squares, like the most recent square was 1980. Pac-Man was released.
Mhm.
Mario, Donkey Kong was released. It's really uncanny about these cartoons and the imagination and the collective in that way. So that's one of the big things that we're going to also likely see this year and next year
Mhm.
is perhaps some major new iconic symbols in that fantastical way, whether it's through movies or through games or TV. We're likely to see some things. So pay attention to the TV shows or characters or fantasy symbols that we see coming out over these next several years. They're probably going to be iconic ones for the United States for centuries.
So cool.
I could go on actually, but I feel like there's many other things. It's so fascinating.
You'll have to do a separate Neptune return for us. Um,
Well,
so basically, what you're saying is America is going through its little transformation. I mean, little is like very understated. And collectively and individually, we're going through massive revolution energy. We're going through change and innovation, while at the same time, because it's not going to be pretty, it's, transformation is a little difficult at times. At the same time, we are going to go through a renaissance where we're going to see more innovation, artistry, right?
yes, I love your word choice.
I try to keep it positive.
Yes. But yeah, I believe it was Joseph Campbell, who I love, who's a famous mythologist, talks about how any change of an age or an era or a paradigm shift is always associated with fighting and like holding on, chaos. It's not major era or changes don't just happen like, okay, now let's do this. Yay. It's the old is like holding on for dear life. And so, yeah, we are very much in that. But yes, with all this Piscean, Neptune, and Aquarian energy, we are going to see a renaissance and brilliance like we've never seen before. I mean, the children that are being born under these energies are going to be so incredibly,
Mhm.
we're going to see some amazing genius. The IQ level of the planet is about to go up so strongly.
Oh, yes.
And yeah, absolutely. Renaissance as far as art, and especially when we see Jupiter go into Pisces,
Mhm.
the urge to want to bring maybe a collective healing and wholeness and unity
Mhm.
is going to be very inspirational for many artists and hopefully politicians and other world figures and artists and celebrities, that we will see a great kind of probably some amazing things that bring us together in ways that we've normally been separated.
Yeah. So the theme is to allow change to happen.
Yes. And if you want to be a little proactive with it, where do you have unfinished business? Saturn is the Lord of karma. So where do you have unfinished business that perhaps you need to finish to move on with your next thing? And also, what are the ways that you've always done things in your life
Mhm.
that aren't really working or aren't going to serve you as the world evolves? Like for instance, for all the people that do that for their own business or whatever, that do marketing, they have to market, you know, 10 years ago, I think it was around when Facebook was just kind of really getting started. Um, but nowadays, I mean, social media is a huge place for marketing and integral in the worldwide kind of business framework. But before, the brick and mortar, printing things was much more real. things are going to continue to develop in this way.
Yeah.
So as you said, as the world evolves, we have to keep up with it. And I also believe it's like an exponential thing, just like with the population of the world. It's not, as we start to evolve, we start to evolve faster.
Mhm.
So, where it maybe took this long for one big step, now it's going this, and it's going to keep going in like shorter increments of time.
Yeah, I definitely feel that for sure. And because information is so readily available now, like, I was talking with some of the women in the circle that back in the day, you would go to an ashram in India and learn from like a guru, and you would stay there for months and learn. And now you can just tune in on Zoom and learn from somebody,
It's crazy.
It is crazy.
I mean, and it's amazing to think about too, and it's humbling to think about, because I study in a school of wisdom and a mystery school, and I have a pretty eclectic spiritual, let's say, background or interests. And when you think about it, like the Library of Alexandria in Egypt, or some of these major institutions where, or we look at the sources and proliferation of wisdom throughout the history of humanity. Nowadays we have so much more access to an infinitely more amount of information, and teachers and wisdom and all of this stuff that you can just pull it up in your hand, in your phone. It's very wild. That's actually one of the other things that I wanted to say with the Aquarius and Uranus technology thing, is expect it also to be more incorporated into, you remember like the Google glasses, when
Mhm.
I don't know whatever happened with the Google glasses, but things like that we're gonna continue to see, where you can like look at your smartphone, just
Yeah.
your glasses, or I don't know, being incorporated more with our body, or easier to use,
Mhm.
is likely to happen too.
Yeah. Is there anything that you didn't share that you want to share? I know there's so many other things we could have talked about, like so many more things, but I think you really ended in a sweet note, like change. There's going to be a lot of creativity and innovation.
I mean, there is always a lot more that I want to say. um, yeah, I here's what I would say, just as to maybe overall sum things up, is this is not a year to do things the way that you've always done them. This is a year to perhaps take some risks, to try something new, to try and reinvent your lifestyle.
Mhm.
We've seen the pandemic really shake up most people's lifestyle. And so how can you continue to adapt to the way that, culture and society and restrictions, or whatever, how can you evolve and adapt and change your own lifestyle to, to flow with society, because
Yeah.
on your own, because it's not exactly like we're going back to the way that things were before the pandemic anytime in the near future,
Right.
in a complete sense,
Yeah. And also it's the 5-year numerology, which is all about change. And I know in the Mayan cosmovision, the Lord year is going to be Ik, I believe, which is change as well. So across all systems, the theme is do things differently. Like take what you've learned from 2020 and your whole life and really create like plans and plant seeds for how you want to live your life.
Thank you for also bringing up the Mayan cosmovision. So so the year lord is going to be Ik, which is the air, which is the breath of life. And so just on that same thing, all the retrograde, the Mercury retrograde is going to be in air. Jupiter and Saturn, the great conjunction is in air, where There's a huge focus in air. So one of the other things I really recommend this year is to develop and very much engage in breath work or some kind of breath practice. But also this is a year to really develop your mind in perhaps a kind of focus that we haven't seen before, because there's, oh my gosh, so much distractions. And,
Yes.
you know, this is a year to really organize your mind, to find tools to create clarity in the mind, to meditate, because we're entering into more of a, in the societal sense, more mental energy, which is not the whole picture.
Yeah.
You know, I also believe that, you know, we'll see more mental illness. You know, like isolation doesn't work for everybody. And we grow up in a society that's, you know, teaches people not to want to be alone, not know how to be alone, you know, and the social media and all this stuff. And there's all this research and information about how young people these days are so disconnected or have more, you know, prone to depression and things like that. So if we can develop our minds and then teach younger people how to be okay with being alone, you know, and with your mind, and use your mind as a tool rather than be captured by your mind, you know, or by anxiety or stress. The mental energy is very strong this year. So it's important that we work on that consciously, that we really connect with that in a healthy way, and find ways to really to moderate that, so we don't get overwhelmed in the mind.
Yes, beautiful. So you can book a private reading with Nick. And when are you going to teach the next astrology class?
Oh my gosh, Laura. So Thursday night.
So you don't have to take like the whole thing. You can just drop into one class.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm in the middle of a 6-week series. This will be the third class. But you can just take an individual class, or the previous classes are video recorded, so I can send them to you so you can catch up. This Thursday, we're talking about moon phases.
Yay!
And magic, how to work magically with the moon phases, and how to, or just, whatever vocabulary you want to use with your manifestation, with different phases of the moon and what kind of work to do.
Yeah.
And then there will be a class the following week, is going to be 2.5 hours on Mercury Retrograde. So, and it'll be right at the beginning of Mercury Retrograde. It is a very, it's an immense subject, and there's also plenty of other specific practices that I like to do during Mercury Retrograde to align myself, and some really cool, once you know about the degrees and what's happening, you can look and kind of follow some predictable cycles in your own life about what's coming up, and based on what you've already experienced. So that's another class that's coming up. I'll see if I can post it in the chat.
Yes, and we will link his information in the show notes and everything like that. And speaking of Aquarian age technology, you need to be a little bit more involved on Instagram. Come on, Nick.
Oh.
But I will link all of his information in the show notes. Sorry to blow up your spot there, but
you are so maybe right. Yes. Well, we're still waiting, Laura, for your dance videos with the zodiac signs.
I know. I really need to get my zodiac signs together, and the outfits and all that stuff.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna post my email for anybody that wants to contact me about a reading.
So I'm just
or about the